In the ashes of the Second World War, the victors uncovered more than ruins. They found secrets buried beneath layers of deception, sealed archives, and names erased from official record. From the frozen coastlines of Greenland to the scorched remnants of Tokyo, fragments of hidden operations and suppressed files tell a story that never reached the history books. What begins as wartime desperation ends as Cold War paranoia, where technology, ideology, and survival collided in the shadows. These are not tales of heroes or battles. They are the echoes of missions denied, projects buried, and truths that someone wanted the world to forget. Chapter 1. Operation Glass Veil, The Ghost of Peenemünde. The story begins in the dying months of the Third Reich, February 1945, as Allied bombers flattened one German city after another. Yet somewhere on the Baltic coast, the island of Usedom pulsed with activity long after Berlin had begun to crumble. Peenemünde, officially designated Heeresversuchsanstalt Peenemünde, the Army Research Center, had been the cradle of the V2 rocket program. Here, men like Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger tested engines that would one day reach space. But as Soviet troops pushed from the east and the Western Allies closed from the west, something happened at Peenemünde that was never fully recorded. According to an intercepted message logged by British intelligence on March 3, 1945, priority cargo Morgenrot was ordered for evacuation under SS escort. The order bore the signature of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, the same man who oversaw the construction of underground armament factories and concentration camp labor systems. Morgenrot, meaning Red Dawn, appeared nowhere in Allied intelligence briefs before that date. The few surviving engineers recalled seeing train cars loaded in the dead of night, bound for an unlisted airstrip near Anklam. Within days, Soviet reconnaissance reported the site abandoned, the runways cratered, the hangars emptied. No aircraft were ever found. After Germany's surrender, the Allied Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, scoured Peenemünde for anything of value. They recovered fragments of blueprints, half-melted alloys, and charred notebooks written in a cipher different from standard German military code. Among them was a single folder marked Glasschleier, glass veil, containing diagrams of propulsion chambers unlike any known V-series design. The file was catalogued by British Major Edwin Rankin under reference CIOS Tech 1945-211, then transferred to US custody during Operation Paperclip. When Rankin later requested a copy of his own findings in 1948, the response from Washington was concise. Record not found. In 1962, an internal memorandum surfaced at the US Air Force's Wright-Patterson facility. It mentioned Project Glass Veil, classified propulsion testing, Zone 12, New Mexico. The document, declassified only in fragments decades later, referenced the recovery of German-origin turbopump components, exhibiting metal fatigue inconsistent with known manufacturing methods of the 1940s. Engineers noted microscopic striations suggesting high-frequency oscillation patterns, as if the material had been subjected to extreme vibration or energy bursts beyond combustion physics. But no further tests were logged, and the name of the overseeing officer, Colonel H. Kammler, Ret, was blacked out in every surviving copy. The Soviets were not unaware. In 1955, KGB defector Oleg Gordievsky revealed that Moscow maintained a special archive on the Peenemünde relocation, describing a convoy sighted near Stettin in the spring of 1945 escorted by SS technical units and reportedly carrying experimental engines. Soviet engineers in Kaluga were later observed reconstructing designs similar to V2 derivatives, but noted missing principles of operation. One report, later translated by MI6, concluded with a chilling line. The core of Morgenrot was not mechanical. It was energetic. In 1973, an independent researcher, Dr. Howard Leclerc, claimed to have located sealed tunnels beneath Peenemünde using magnetometric scanning. He obtained limited access through the East German military and filmed what he described as a sealed freight elevator leading deeper than the known complex. Within days of submitting his footage to Der Spiegel, the East German Stasi confiscated all materials. Leclerc was later found dead in his Berlin apartment, cause of death, carbon monoxide poisoning. His family received no explanation, and all correspondence referencing glass veil vanished from his personal effects. Modern German archives list Peenemünde as fully cleared by Allied occupation Yet discrepancies remain. The inventory of recovered equipment compiled in 1946 lists 32 turbine housings. In US archival records, only 28 are logged. 4 units remain unaccounted for. The Soviet archives, partially opened after 1991, mention 5 recovered chambers of experimental character, discovered in a warehouse near Gdynia, Poland. The dimensions correspond exactly to the missing 4. Whether one additional prototype existed or was successfully evacuated remains uncertain. The last known mention of glass veil appeared in a 1988 NATO intelligence review on historical weapons transfers. Buried within a section labeled Declassified Wartime Technologies, a line reads, Glass veil, relocated propulsion intelligence, classified joint containment, 1946-1960, containment not cancellation. The term implies something was kept, monitored, perhaps tested. When cross-referenced against environmental radiation surveys from the White Sands missile range during the same period, faint irregularities appear in isotopic residue levels, anomalies small enough to dismiss, but persistent over decades. Today, Peenemünde stands as a museum of rocketry. Visitors see reconstructed V-2 engines, pristine models of the missiles that once terrorized London. But deep within the restricted northern section of the island, sealed under decades of concrete and sand, lies a zone marked simply as Sperrgebiet A. Former East German guards claimed that during the 1960s, shipments arrived at night escorted by Soviet personnel. They were ordered to stand down, and the cargo was unloaded into tunnels beneath the facility. No documentation of these events survives in any German record. The implications of Operation Glass Veil stretch far beyond Germany's surrender. It suggests that the race for post-war superiority, the so-called space race, may have begun not with exploration, but containment. Both East and West may have shared a silent agreement. Whatever had been built in Peenemünde's final months was not to be duplicated, only buried. If Kammler escaped, as some historians speculate, he may have taken with him more than secrets. He may have carried knowledge so destabilizing that both sides preferred to erase it entirely. The surviving pages of the Glass Veil dossier end with a handwritten note in faded blue ink. Technologie für Morgenrot, zu früh für die Welt. Technology for Red Dawn, too soon for the world. Whether it was a warning, a boast, or a confession remains unknown. But every generation since has lived under the shadow of the same question. What exactly rose at Peenemünde before the Reich fell, and how much of it still echoes in the classified archives of the nations that inherited its ghosts? Chapter 2. The Odessa Papers. Flight of the Reich. In the aftermath of Germany's defeat, Europe lay in ruins, but in the shadows, another kind of reconstruction began. It was not about cities or nations. It was about networks. Odessa, the Organisation der ehemaligen SS-Angehörigen, officially never existed. Yet in 1947, a British intelligence clerk named Harold Whitby stumbled upon a coded manifest in Hamburg's port registry that would challenge that notion entirely. The document, bound in thin brown paper and signed Freundlich & Co., was marked for destruction as surplus shipping correspondence. Whitby, noticing strange phrasing and an irregular cipher pattern, kept it aside. Within its lines were references to P-12, medical cargo, priority transfer, Argentina. The accompanying page bore a faint SS Eagle stamp and the words Abteilung if B4, transit via Genoa. It was a ghost trail for men who should not have escaped. By 1948, the Allies had begun to notice the disappearance of mid-ranking officers once listed in the Nuremberg indictments. Men like Dr. Ernst Bruckner of the Waffen-SS Medical Corps and Lieutenant Heinrich Feldhaus, a logistics officer from Dachau, were suddenly unaccounted for. The Red Cross refugee processing records showed them as displaced civilians using forged identities issued by priests in northern Italy. A Vatican intelligence liaison, under pressure from the Americans to assist in anti-communist containment, quietly facilitated travel documents for technicians and specialists. What they were technicians of was seldom questioned. The Odessa manifest recovered by Whitby referenced a blue route, a path leading through Bavaria, the Tyrolean Alps, Genoa, and onward by freighter to Buenos Aires. Cargo listings were deliberately vague. Mechanical parts, biological material, restricted archives. MI6 decoded a line from the document reading, Kisten 1218 unter persönlicher Aufsicht Dr. Bruckner, crates 1218 under direct supervision of Dr. Bruckner, the same Bruckner who had vanished months earlier from Allied detention near Augsburg. When Whitby tried to trace the ships involved, one stood out, the SS Santa Lucia, registered under a Panamanian flag, departed Genoa June 23, 1948, and arrived in Mar del Plata, Argentina, on July 14th. Its cargo was declared as agricultural instruments. The manifest disappeared from Argentine customs records within weeks. In 1951, British intelligence received a report from Buenos Aires. An informant claimed that former SS officers had established a technical consortium in the province of Córdoba, operating under the name Asociación Mercurio. The group's headquarters were in an abandoned winery, fortified and guarded, employing dozens of German expatriates. Locals whispered that shipments arrived from Europe labeled as medical, waste or industrial chemicals. Photographs, taken by a field agent, showed containers marked with the same stenciled symbol found in Whitby's manifest, a circle bisected by a lightning bolt, the insignia of the SS Technical Division. The British passed the report to the Americans. The Americans classified it and said nothing further. When the CIA declassified portions of its safe haven program in 1972, a reference surfaced under Odessa Blue Route. The attached memo described transfer of personnel, resources, and research data relevant to pre-atomic and biological experimentation. The destination listed was Patagonia, Sector 9. The author of the memo, a Colonel John E. Redding, had later been reassigned to Project Paperclip's German scientist integration team. His correspondence with the US Department of Defense contained one redacted sentence that, when restored years later under the Freedom of Information Act, read, "Subject Bruckner delivered experimental tissue cultures for continuation under authorized American oversight, Operation Chrysalid." Meanwhile, the Soviet Union conducted its own investigation. A 1954 KGB internal report from the Lubyanka archives referred to Nazi specialists in South America producing cultures from preserved material, origin unknown. Moscow believed the West was harboring war criminals to exploit their biological expertise. Western intelligence dismissed it as propaganda, but when a smallpox-like outbreak struck a remote area of Patagonia in 1955, the Soviet argument gained quiet traction among a few within the WHO and the US Army Medical Corps. The local outbreak was erased from official epidemiological records, cited as avian influenza misreporting. Harold Whitby never forgot the manifest. In 1968, he wrote a letter to the Times, claiming the British government had suppressed evidence of an organised SS escape route. His home was later raided under the Official Secrets Act, his files confiscated. He died in 1971 in what was reported as a car accident near Croydon. Among his personal belongings, his daughter found a carbon copy of a single page, yellowed and brittle. It bore a line typed in uneven German. Odessa continues, the cargo lives. By the 1980s, investigative journalists began to revisit Argentina's post-war influx of German settlers. One name recurred, Dr. Ernst Bruckner, now Ernesto Bruno, director of a medical research foundation in Bariloche. No photograph of him exists after 1945, but eyewitnesses described a tall man with silver hair, always wearing gloves, claiming sensitivity to sunlight. When Argentine investigators visited the foundation in 1985, following new human rights inquiries, the facility had been burned to the ground in what was described as an electrical accident. All staff and records were lost. No body matching Bruno or Bruckner was ever recovered. The few surviving Odessa files that reached Western hands in the 1990s revealed a chilling picture. The network had evolved from an escape mechanism into a transnational enterprise, preserving Nazi wealth, ideology, and perhaps scientific data no one wanted to admit existed. The term biological samples appeared repeatedly in Odessa manifests, yet no sample inventories were ever recovered. US intelligence redactions under biomedical continuations point toward covert, Cold War research projects involving unexplained cell cultures and genetic experimentation, projects whose foundations may trace directly to crates marked Cargo 12 in Hamburg, 1947. To this day, researchers in Argentina and Germany attempt to piece together the fragments of Whitby's discovery. The remaining photocopies of the manifest bear water stains, partial ciphers, and the word Odessa Blue Route stand still pending. Stand still. A pause, not an end. The implication is that the network was never dismantled, merely dormant, waiting for the right conditions to resume. And in an age of privatized bioresearch, international shipping, and disappearing identities, the old machinery of Odessa may no longer need ships or false passports. It may simply need funding and silence. The last entry in the British cryptanalysis log regarding the manifest reads, in a hand different from Whitby's. Bruckner's cargo not found. Assume integration under new authority. No one ever specified whose authority that was. But across 7 decades, the echo of those coded lines remains. Proof that in the wake of one war, another continued in laboratories and boardrooms, hidden beneath the same calm word, relocation. Chapter 3. Project Iceworm, the bunker below Greenland. The official story began in 1960, when the US Army Corps of Engineers announced the construction of a polar research base beneath Greenland's ice sheet, publicly known as Camp Century. The project was hailed as a triumph of engineering and Cold War ingenuity, a self-contained city under the ice, powered by a portable nuclear reactor. Journalists were invited to tour its tunnels, living quarters, and laboratories. They saw cheerful scientists drilling ice cores and studying climate data, never knowing that the base's true purpose had nothing to do with science. Its classified name was Project Iceworm, and its objective was the establishment of a subterranean network of missile launch sites capable of striking the Soviet Union within minutes. Declassified fragments from the US Army's Operation Iceworm Progress Report, dated December 1961, reveal chilling details. The report outlined a plan to install up to 600 nuclear-tipped Iceman missiles across an area of 52,000 square miles beneath the ice sheet. Each missile would rest in a hidden tunnel, its coordinates shifting with the glacier's slow movement to evade Soviet detection. What the public never learned was that the glacial terrain proved unstable, warping and collapsing the test tunnels within months. By 1966, the official line declared the base non-viable. But engineers who served there told another story, that the instability wasn't natural. In early 1962, seismic readings near the Camp Century reactor showed unusual oscillations inconsistent with ice compression. The data logs, signed by Lieutenant Commander Joseph Halverson, mention artificial resonance patterns of unknown origin. Within days, an unscheduled airlift arrived carrying sealed containers marked Project Iceworm, Annex 12. Civilian contractors were removed from the site, and the tunnels sealed under direct US Army supervision. The annex, unlike the main camp, does not appear in any construction blueprint. Its supposed coordinates, listed as Grid 2140N 632E, fall in an area later reclassified as non-existent due to ice drift. However, aerial thermographic imagery taken by the Danish Geological Survey in 1978 shows a heat anomaly exactly at those coordinates, nearly 2 degrees above the surrounding ice temperature, persistent through the decades. Documents recovered through the 1999 US Army Environmental Data Review reference and unacknowledged containment incident at Camp Century on March 19, 1963. The brief summary reads, radiological contamination localized, secondary containment successful, no personnel casualties. Yet when cross-referenced against military death records, 4 names from the 1st Arctic Engineering Battalion were quietly struck from the roll that same week. Their cause of death listed as accident during transit. Their next of kin received sealed letters. A former logistics officer, interviewed in 1987, claimed he personally witnessed 2 bodies flown out in lead-lined coffins. They said it wasn't radiation, he recalled. They said the ice reacted. When Danish authorities demanded full environmental disclosure in the 1990s, the United States admitted that radioactive waste and diesel fuel had been left behind. But nothing was said about the Annex 12 tunnels. A leaked 2002 Pentagon memo labeled Strategic Arctic Assets, Legacy Sites, includes an unexplained line. Annex 12, status unknown. Retrieve or neutralize before total thaw. It was the first official acknowledgement that something of value, or danger, still remained under the Greenland ice. Satellite radar imaging in 2015, conducted by the European Space Agency, detected symmetrical subglacial voids extending over a kilometre beneath the original Camp Century site. Analysts initially dismissed the formation as glacial fracturing, but when radar frequencies were adjusted, metallic reflection signatures appeared within the voids, parallel lines consistent with reinforced tunnel architecture. That same year, Danish journalist Lars Nystrom obtained a partial declassification order under Greenland's Self-Government Act. What he received were 36 heavily redacted pages. The most legible line reading: Annex 12 is not a storage site. It was a reactor testbed for classified propulsion modules, transferred 1963 from Peenemünde assets. Peenemünde, the birthplace of the V2. The line linked Iceworm directly to the ghost of Operation Glass Veil. According to Nystrom's follow-up investigation, US military shipments marked frozen samples, radioactive, departed from Thule Air Base in 1963, destined for Los Alamos. The accompanying manifests were signed under the pseudonym H. Kamler. Historians dismiss the signature as a coincidence, an alias echoing a Nazi general presumed dead since 1945. Yet it appears again in a 1965 inventory of Iceworm components, this time with the handwritten note: hydrogen containment test successful, further trials terminated due to instability. Whatever was being tested beneath the Greenland ice, it was more than missile storage. It was propulsion, experimental, dangerous, and buried under the convenient label of environmental hazard. By the late 1970s, US and Danish scientists began to record abnormal magnetic readings around the former base. The data was filed under geomagnetic anomaly study and forgotten. But when a new expedition attempted to drill nearby in 2018, their sensors malfunctioned within 300 meters of the suspected Annex 12 site. Equipment readings spiked, radio signals cut out, and the drill bit sheared cleanly as if it struck hardened metal beneath the ice. The team withdrew, citing safety concerns. Within months, all raw data was seized under US Department of Defense Order 14381B, Arctic Defense Interests. Today, as the ice sheet melts and previously sealed layers begin to emerge, parts of Camp Century have started to collapse. Environmental researchers have found synthetic polymers and alloy fragments inconsistent with 1960s materials. Some show isotopic traces similar to those used in early fusion experiments. If confirmed, it would mean that Project Iceworm's secret annex housed not only missiles, but an attempt at controlled hydrogen propulsion decades ahead of known technology. The danger is that the melting ice could expose materials that were never meant to see daylight, remnants of a Cold War project so compartmentalized that even those who built it may not have known its full purpose. Declassified Army correspondence from 1964 ends with a single, cryptic instruction: maintain the illusion of collapse. The ice will bury it deeper than any vault. But now, as climate change reverses that burial, Greenland may soon uncover what history refused to acknowledge: that beneath the guise of research, humanity built something in the ice it could neither control nor fully understand. The world called it Project Iceworm. Inside the Pentagon, they used another term altogether: Containment Initiative Alpha. Whatever the truth, it sleeps in the cold, waiting for the thaw. Chapter 4: The Black Mercury Files, Tokyo's Hidden Lab. In the final months of 1944, as Allied bombers reduced Tokyo to fire and ash, one facility on the city's northern edge remained conspicuously untouched. Hidden among warehouses near the Arakawa River, it bore no military insignia, no markings, no activity by day. Its official registry identified it as a civilian materials research annex of the Imperial Health Bureau. Yet US aerial reconnaissance photographs show multiple security perimeters and roof structures identical to those of known military laboratories. The facility's internal designation, recovered decades later from a captured Ministry of War log, read: Site 731B, Kurosuisei, Black Mercury. The origins of Kurosuisei trace back to 1942, when the Imperial Japanese Army Medical Department authorized parallel development facilities to Unit 731 in Manchuria. While Unit 731 focused on biological warfare, Site 731B was established to pursue energy-based weaponization under the guise of industrial chemistry. The supervising officer, Colonel Shiro Kameda, reported directly to Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, but unlike Ishii's notorious program, Kameda's research files never surfaced during the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. His name was quietly omitted from post-war indictments. American records, however, contain scattered mentions of Kameda materials under post-surrender collection logs. The first direct evidence of Black Mercury appeared in 1952, during a CIA technical intelligence sweep of Japanese industrial archives. Among confiscated Imperial research notes was a partial translation of an experimental compound described as metallic fluid with radiogenic excitation under confinement. The document, titled Project K Suisse, Phase 3, indicated attempts to create a semi-stable liquid metal isotope capable of generating directed energy through rapid decay. The process, in crude terms, resembled an early form of radiothermal propulsion, a principle decades ahead of its time. What unsettled investigators were the human test notes appended to the report. Exposure thresholds exceed predicted tolerance. Recruits subject to vascular crystallization within minutes. The US occupation authorities classified the find under technical. Intelligence Unit 1397 and shipped all samples to Yokosuka Naval Base for transfer to Guam. The transfer logs list 5 containers labeled medical waste, each accompanied by a Japanese technician whose identity was never recorded. 2 weeks later, a confidential Navy memo dated November 14, 1953, reports unscheduled detonation event aboard transport, containment breached, samples incinerated. The vessel was quietly scuttled off the coast of Okinawa. No press report ever appeared, and all subsequent correspondence referred to the incident only as the Black Mercury mishap. Surviving Japanese witnesses later described the original lab's operations as impossible to forget. One assistant, interviewed anonymously in 1961, recalled being instructed to wear heavy gloves and goggles to handle dark silver water that steamed without heat. Another noted that when the liquid was exposed to open air, it emitted a faint blue glow and burned through wood without fire. After the war, Site 731B was said to have been demolished by aerial bombing, yet post-war fire maps show the surrounding district destroyed, but the plot at Lot 3B still intact. In 1946, American engineers from the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, SCAP, surveyed the site, declaring it cleared and safe. But declassified SCAP photographs from the same week show concrete vaults still sealed, marked with radiation hazard symbols, an icon Japan had no official design for at the time. In 1974, a Japanese journalist, Kohei Matsuda, published an exposé claiming that the remnants of Kuro Suisse had been secretly recovered by US intelligence and integrated into Cold War-era propulsion studies. His article quoted unnamed sources from the Defense Agency, who claimed that American forces had not destroyed Site 731B, but reinforced it. Matsuda disappeared 3 months later. The publisher retracted the article, citing fabrication, yet surviving proofs show official inspection stamps identical to those used by SCAP's Scientific Intelligence Division. Matsuda's notes contained a peculiar phrase, allegedly copied from a recovered file: "Mercury will flow east again." By the 1980s, radiation surveys of northern Tokyo revealed microcontamination levels inconsistent with known industrial sources. Japanese environmental researchers attributed them to post-war scrap processing, but internal Ministry of Environment memoranda reference legacy contamination consistent with pre-war military isotope experiments. A Freedom of Information request filed in 2010 for the original SCAP technical recovery logs returned a one-page response. No such documents found. The response bore the same code designation that appears in declassified CIA files concerning nuclear testing, a bureaucratic sleight of hand used to bury classified projects beneath unrelated record groups. In 1998, construction workers excavating a new subway line near the old Arakawa industrial zone unearthed fragments of laboratory glassware fused into metallic residue. Radiation levels spiked briefly before the area was sealed by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government under public health protocols. A week later, an unmarked US transport plane landed at Yokota Air Base, remained overnight, and departed before dawn. The recovered debris was never listed in any Japanese environmental report, but a year later, the US Department of Energy's classified inventory of foreign origin radiological materials added a new entry: Sample 44TK, unknown metallic isotope, Mercury base, location of recovery, Tokyo. By the early 2000s, historians cross-referencing US and Japanese wartime projects noticed repeated references to liquid phase radiation modulation experiments occurring months before the Hiroshima bombing. While the Manhattan Project remained focused on uranium and plutonium, these Japanese efforts seemed to pursue a parallel goal: not nuclear detonation, but directed, portable energy release. Whether it ever succeeded remains unknown. The physical remnants are gone, the files burned or sealed. Yet the pattern of cover-ups, missing archives, and unexplained contamination points towards something far beyond conventional wartime research. In the end, Kuro Suisse remains a name spoken only in archival whispers. The original lab site is now buried beneath residential blocks and a park, with no plaque, no acknowledgement. Residents occasionally report strange magnetic interference or patches of discolored soil after heavy rain. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government calls these coincidences, but the last entry in the translated Kameda papers, preserved in a private collection in Kyoto, suggests otherwise. "We touched a living metal," it responded, "then it slept." Black Mercury may have been the most dangerous project Imperial Japan ever conceived, not because of its military potential, but because its legacy bled quietly into the Cold War's technological race. The liquid may be gone, yet its shadow persists in every secret program that followed. The Americans buried it, the Soviets chased it, and Tokyo, rebuilt and gleaming, still sits above the silence of the lab that refused to die. Chapter 5. Echoes of Redlight, the Berlin Intercepts, Berlin, 1948. The city was divided but not yet solidified. The scars of war ran through every street, and in the gutted shells of old bunkers, shadows still operated on frequencies no one claimed. It began when a US Signal Corps unit stationed near Tempelhof detected a strange radio transmission on April 19th. The frequency, 11,073 Ms, was faint, intermittent, and encoded in a cipher that bore hallmarks of the defunct German Abwehr, yet contained elements unfamiliar to Allied cryptanalysts. The message repeated hourly, each burst lasting 90 seconds, followed by silence. It identified itself only once, in a clipped mechanical voice. "Redlight active. Hydra continues." At first, the Americans assumed it was a rogue German remnant testing abandoned equipment. But after triangulating the signal, they discovered something unnerving. The source appeared to originate not from any functioning transmitter above ground, but from beneath the city, specifically, a sealed U-Bahn tunnel near the Tempelhof airfield. Collapsed during the 1945 bombing, a detachment of the 2nd Signal Battalion was dispatched to investigate. On April 23rd, they entered through a maintenance shaft, descending into a chamber that had been bricked over since the war's end. What they found was a communications bunker, intact, operational, and powered by a generator running on Soviet components manufactured after 1946. The bunker's walls were lined with equipment stamped with Cyrillic lettering, but the wiring diagrams bore unmistakable German design signatures. In one corner stood an array of reel-to-reel devices transmitting encrypted bursts at regular intervals. The soldiers secured a set of magnetic tapes, later analyzed by cryptologists at the Allied Kommandatura. The recordings contained hundreds of numerical sequences interspersed with single German words: Hydra, Stufe 2, Phase 2, Übergabe, handover. Analysts soon realized the structure mirrored an early Soviet cipher. But the keying method matched the pre-war German Enigma system. It was, as one codebreaker described it, a language built from two enemies. The discovery was immediately classified under US National Security Directive 104A and transferred to a restricted operations division. The tapes were labeled Project Redlight. Their content suggested that, during the chaotic final weeks of the war, elements of the German intelligence apparatus had not merely been captured by the Soviets, but had collaborated with them. The phrase Operation Hydra referred to an Abwehr project dating back to 1943, the establishment of redundant intelligence nodes designed to survive the Reich's fall. Each node was to continue transmitting coded intelligence to whomever could decode it. Whether the Soviets inherited Hydra willingly or seized it remains unclear. A memorandum from US Army intelligence, dated May 12, 1948, references the interrogation of a captured German signals officer, Hauptmann Rolf Nehring. Under questioning, Nehring stated that Hydra was not meant for Berlin. It was meant for after Berlin. He described an order from Admiral Wilhelm Canaris in early 1944, instructing select Abwehr units to prepare transfer protocols to any hostile power capable of continuing the struggle against Western plutocracy. In Nehring's words, "The enemy of my enemy will inherit the tools." He was found dead 2 days later in his cell, officially ruled a suicide. The file was sealed indefinitely. The Redlight transmissions continued until September 1951, when they abruptly ceased. But during those 3 years, Allied monitoring stations in West Berlin logged over 2,000 bursts of encrypted traffic. Decrypt attempts yielded coordinates across Eastern Europe, Kaliningrad, Minsk, Prague, and a remote site near Lake Ladoga. When correlated with Soviet construction data, those coordinates aligned with the early locations of what Western intelligence later identified as radar installations and atomic test monitoring posts. The implication was staggering. The technology and encryption methods used to build Soviet communication infrastructure may have originated from surviving German specialists, Hydra, reborn in the service of a new empire. In 1976, after the partial declassification of Cold War signals intelligence, fragments of the Redlight tapes resurfaced. A US Senate review committee cited them as evidence of foreign technology acquisition through unacknowledged transfer programs. One report described communications artifacts integrating German relay principles with post-war Soviet encryption matrices. Among the redacted names appeared a familiar one, Colonel H. Kamler. His name, absent from every Allied war crimes record, reappeared here, now as a consultant for technical transition facilitation. Whether Kamler ever survived 1945 has long been disputed, but this reference suggested something far more unsettling. He may have coordinated the first joint Soviet-German intelligence operation after the war. Further analysis of the tapes revealed anomalies beyond simple espionage. Embedded within the numeric sequences were faint sub-frequencies, hidden tones that formed patterns when graphed on early oscilloscopes. Analysts initially dismissed them as transmission noise, but a declassified report from 1952 stated, patterns recurring at 7.2-second intervals form structured wave modulations, possibly carrying additional encrypted data. Later digital reconstruction of the surviving tapes in 1999 confirmed this. The transmissions contained layered messages, one audible and one hidden within the carrier wave. The lower signal, once isolated, spelled out a chilling fragment in broken German. The signal must never stop. Hydra lives through silence. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, East German archives briefly opened their records to Western researchers. Among them was a file titled Project Rotlicht, catalogued under the Ministry for State Security. It contained 3 photographs of the Tempelhof tunnels, dated 1965, 2 decades after the Americans sealed them. In the images, Soviet technicians stand beside modernized radio equipment bearing both Cyrillic and Latin labels. The caption reads simply, System Maintenance, Hydra Relay. The tunnels were later flooded with concrete during airport reconstruction. Yet seismic scans in 2007 revealed a void beneath the site, roughly 40 meters long, still generating electromagnetic interference. To this day, Redlight remains an unresolved Cold War enigma. The recordings stored at Fort Meade occupy a locked archive known internally as the Echo Collection. Requests for access are uniformly denied. The last known internal audit in 1983 included an unexplained note. Intermittent low-frequency emissions persist despite deactivation order. The signal, they say, never truly ceased. It shifted, altered its frequency, and blended into the noise of the modern radio spectrum. Some amateur radio enthusiasts claim to still hear it. A faint mechanical pulse beneath static, cycling every 7 seconds. To most, it is just interference. But to those who have heard the original tapes, it is unmistakable. The ghost of Hydra, whispering across time. The war ended on paper, the walls fell, the ideologies collapsed. But the signal remains, buried under decades of denial and secrecy. Proof that in the rubble of Berlin, someone ensured that the Reich's final message would never stop broadcasting. Its origin may have been German, its inheritors Soviet, its silence American, and its true purpose still unknown. They say the war ended in 1945, but the archives disagree. Each discovery, each classified folder pried open, leads not to closure but to continuation. From the disappearing engines of Peenemünde to the unmarked convoys of Odessa, from the tunnels beneath Greenland's ice to the sealed vaults under Tokyo and Berlin, a pattern emerges, not of isolated secrets, but of an unbroken chain. The research never stopped. The men who built it never vanished. And the technology that was too soon for the world simply changed flags. The question is no longer what was hidden, but how much of it still lives, humming quietly beneath the surface of our modern age, waiting for someone to listen again.